Who here, show of hands, who here puts themselves in their nature journals regularly? Excellent. Cool. And so I'm sure that a bunch of folks will, like, we can brainstorm about how we do it and then what helps us the most with doing it. I figured I could start out by sharing just a couple of different things about putting yourself in your nature journal and then how it can help. So one thing, putting yourself in your nature journal, if you decide to draw yourself in, then you can act like a good narrator to some things. So maybe you're taking down data, maybe you're doing your observations, but then maybe you want to enter in a thought about how you're doing it, or like a thought about what you're seeing. So for example, this weekend, I went with some friends inside of an insect house, and I happened to be looking at some death feigner beetles and learning about how when they have higher humidity or more water in the atmosphere, then they turn dark colored. And then when there's lower humidity or less water, then they turn this waxy blue color. And so I included myself on the page saying, just looking at them makes me thirsty, because I wanted to remember that feeling that I had, just how I felt when I looked at them. And so that's a thing that you can do in your nature journals, is to include yourself as a narrator or as a reaction to whatever it is, whatever phenomena that you're experiencing. And then that gives your nature journal entries more of a storyteller vibe to them. Or it can help if you're wanting somebody else to read your nature journal, then it can help somebody else kind of look and follow along with the little you on the page. Another thing that we sometimes will do is to include ourselves as a sense of scale. So if we're looking at maybe something really tall like a tree, for example, then you might draw yourself next to the tree so you can see how big it is compared to you. Which can be really helpful if you're not much of a numbers person, but you still want to include some kind of measurement or quantifications. Another thing that we can include with ourselves that's less about pictures and more about numbers is what Jack likes to talk about as biometrics. So a way you can do that is you can measure your shoe length or your height or your pace, and you can measure that with 10 steps equaling how many meters or how many feet, etc. And so then that way, if you're out in the wilderness or out in nature and you don't have a measuring tape, then you can just rely on your own pace to tell you your distance. And you can include that as being a measurement. And you can do the same thing with different parts of your body. Like you might be walking through grass and you might be saying, oh, the grass is knee height today. Well, how much is that? You can write down what your knee height is. Or also your fingers, you can figure out how long one of your fingers are, or maybe the bits on the back here with our creases, whether that's an inch or however many centimeters, or how much a decimeter is. So biometrics is another thing, another way we can include ourselves in our nature journals. Those are some of the ways that I like to, but I'd like to hear from you. So Billy Joe, what are some ways that you like to include yourself in your nature journal?
Hi, everyone. So some of the ways that I do it are, similar to what Avea was saying, by giving my reactions. So I might give like a wow if it's sort of a wow for me. But one of the other things I like to do, especially with my kiddos, is to use emojis or some kind of like moment to reflect on how they're feeling before we even sort of get started, and how they're feeling in that moment. So really to get them to understand, like, are they hungry? Are they sleepy? Are they kind of sad or angry or whatever it is? And then I like to check back in with them at the end. So somewhere sort of on the top of the page is the original emoji, and they can use words, but emojis seem to be pretty universal for everyone. And then at the bottom of the page, right as we're sort of wrapping up, getting them to sort of, check back in with themselves and say, like, well, how am I feeling now? And is it different? And, sometimes it's not different. If the kid comes in super happy, then usually they stay super happy. But if they come in and they're feeling a little bit sad or a little bit tired or a little bit, just kind of off, usually they feel better. And so I really like to point that out, in that it's, nature journaling is so many different things, but one of those things being, sort of going on to what we were talking with Kate a couple weeks ago, is self-care, right? And really taking that time to sit in that moment without all the noise of the world, and just taking that sort of time and space. And I actually did that the other day. I was away camping and I sort of did a little landscape-edo of my sit spot that I was sort of happened to be in that moment. And instead of, doing all the I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, I just sort of reflected on being in that space and sort of what that space sort of made me feel like for that day. And I literally named it my sit spot for the day. And that was really just about me being in nature and not so much about the exploration and all my questions that I normally had. And so I think that's giving ourselves permission to be able to do that sometimes as well and not be so focused on I didn't ask enough questions. And sometimes just putting yourself in it is just as awesome. So those are some of the things that I like to do, especially with my kids, and then kind of going from there. So what about anyone else? Do we have anyone else who has got some ideas? And maybe even if they haven't tried it yet, maybe they've heard of someone else doing it, or they're thinking like, oh, I think this would be really cool to try and see how it works, or anything like that. It would be awesome to hear from everyone. Oh, Aisha, awesome. Aisha, I'm going to bring you into the, I'm going to add you to the spotlight, and then I'm going to ask you to unmute, and hopefully that works. Yay! Okay, good.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
I was going to say that, yeah, I have not used the thought bubbles yet. I've been using some of these other things Eva and Billy Joe shared, but not the thought bubbles. So I made note. Thank you. The one other one that I have been inserting myself is actually as a geographical reference to what I'm doing. And that's been what I'm often drawn to when I throw myself in. Sometimes it's part of actually the landscapito. Like that was all there. I was here in the dunes hiding from the snowy plovers, because that is part of the memory set that's really joyful for me. Yeah, something like that. And sometimes I've included whoever else is journaling near me, because that was part of the setting. And it may just be their hat and their name scribbled next to a hat, like, oh, Preston was sitting right here while I taught my class. And I'm journaling. So sort of including the closest people to me in it as well. And I think the most fun inclusion I think I ever did was when I was sitting at a bay and the tide started coming in, and I found myself putting in my feet. And it really, that brings back the feeling of it more than anything else, because that water was just, creeping closer and closer. And I tried to even show where the biggest flow was coming from, this little channel in the sand. And next thing I knew, what does that say? Oh yeah, water. My feet were wet. And I think, oh yeah, and I didn't draw her in, but like I said, I went with my really good friend, and I've put in, my friend Rita is doing watercolors right next to me, because that was a key part of the experience, that I wasn't there alone that particular occasion. So yeah, I think those are my two add-ons. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. That's so fun. I love the geographical space and sort of putting yourself, like, where are you sitting? It's funny, with my landscape-edo, I went down to the beach with my kids and stuff later, and I was like, that's where I was sitting, right on that rock between those two trees. The rock that you're playing on, that's in my picture, right? So I was able to just, like, all day, like, be like, I was sitting here for like an hour and a half, you know what I mean? So
Suddenly it's your rock.
Yeah, suddenly it's like, it was my space for that amount of time. And I love adding in just like feet and hands, right? Because sometimes drawing our whole self gets really overwhelming, right? Like, drawing people is super hard, and sometimes even our stick people don't always, like, maybe turn out exactly how we wanted. So sometimes you can just add a foot or a hand or a hat, which I totally love.
A hat and
totally...
a ponytail, and I'm done.
Yeah,
because I've
that's
talked
amazing.
before. Drawing is not my forte, and I'm like,
yeah,
I can tell it's me.
I totally love that. I literally wrote that down.
You could have your baseball cap.
I
have my wide brim, your baseball. There's Billy Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, that was amazing. I totally just wrote that in. And then adding in the people that are with you, right? Which I think is amazing. I think Jack said that as well. One time he drew in his kiddos into his journal that the girls had been out with him at one point. That was in a talk that we'd had a while ago, which I thought was really awesome. Love that. Thanks, Aisha. That's amazing. Anybody else have anything that they would like to contribute? I'm going to go into gallery view because I'm missing. Oh, there we go. Janice. Awesome. Janice, I'm going to bring you into the spotlight and then do that. And oh, and are you unmuted? Yes, yeah, I think you're good. Oh, you're good. Okay, great. Go ahead, Janice.
What I do, it's not as direct as drawing myself into the picture, but sometimes I'll just write in capital letters reflection and then just write for as long as I feel like writing about whatever it is that's going on in my head because of where I am, or might even be about something else, but it's to capture my thoughts and feelings.
I love that. And I love how you're just like, it's going to be what it is. It's going to be a sentence or a paragraph or a story, like just sort of letting those words kind of flow. I feel like that's a very Rebecca moment there. Rebecca Rolnick is a big writer. And so I can see her just sort of diving into that realm of just letting it sort of happen. And that's kind of what I did with my little landscape Hito the other day. And then I was, it's ridiculous, but 2 teenagers came frolicking down on the beach and I was like, oh, you're kind of in my space. And then I was like, no, this is everybody's space. So I added them into my journal. Because I'm like, they get to be here and enjoy it as well, right? So I had that moment and I was like, you need to check yourself. And so, yeah, as I just added them in, right, as that there was, these 2 lovely girls who were just having a great time as well. So I love that. So reflection, sort of like, I don't know, like a paragraph or a story, let the words flow. I think that's really cool. Thanks, Janice. Does anyone else have anything? Aisha's coming back to us. All right, hold on one sec. I am not super fast.
Can I unmute? Yeah, and I found something so
there you
hilarious.
go.
So hilarious. I gotta share it. It is like, take a lanscapito and turn it into a itetito. So very tiny. Here was my whole page. And I think, a hawk suddenly went by. So don't worry about the whole page. But look at the tiny, tiny thing I put in the corner trying to capture the flow of where the bird flew. And there I am. I don't even know. There's, I think, the oak tree. So,
I love that.
That was like a 1 minute or 30-second string of like, that was what happened overhead from there to there.
Yeah, like almost like spatial awareness, right?
Spatial awareness. Yeah, it kind of connects with my geography. Is like, I'm clearly on to where was it happening.
I'm attaching that to my geography part on my book here. Spatial awareness. Amazing. I love that so much. All right. Anybody else want to contribute? I feel like Kate Ryder, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel like this was one of your ideas at the same time. So I'm not sure if you're able to come in for a little chat or not. Anybody else have any ideas, or even if it's not something you've done yet, but something that you are, thinking could be a good idea to sort of add yourself into it. Avea, come on. There we go. Adding the spotlight. There we go.
Sorry. It's also occurring to me. So I know that we're also going to be having a Wild Wonder session that touches on this with the amazing Kate Rudder, who is here today. But it also occurs to me, if anybody else struggles with the whole, and again, I like that there's ways of including ourselves that don't involve drawing ourselves. But I thought I would just share for a second, as somebody who used to be kind of afraid of drawing people, and I still am. Like how I kind of got started drawing myself in my nature journal. Because first of all, I figured if I'm drawing myself, then I'm not going to be offending anybody else out in the world because it's just me, it's just my face. And I thought about my first way that I started with drawing is that I would do literal stick figure. You can just do the stick figure, and then you could just easily just say me, and that could be what your students prefer. Or if I wanted to make my stick figure a little bit more animated or whatever, then I could do like maybe just my hair, and And because I have this crazy curly hair, then, you know, just do that. So like, that's a really easy way of fancying up your stick figure. Or maybe you're wearing a certain outfit that you really like that day, or maybe, I don't know. So there are ways that you can keep it pretty simple and then just fancy it up without having to go full bore, you know, complete portrait and everything like that. Another thing that helped me was to sort of think more in terms of a cartoon and really simple. So for example, maybe my head is going to look just like a really simple circle. If I happen to want to emphasize that, like maybe this is back when I have a pointy chin, then I can just sort of add that in. Okay, I have a pointy chin. And then you pick out 3 features, or at least what I did is I picked out 3 features of mine that were distinctive, and you could do the same to add that. And so for me, the ones that I chose were my eyebrows. They didn't have to be like looking exactly like mine. My widow's peak. So maybe your hair, maybe somebody does their hair, or maybe you wear a set of glasses that you always like. And, you know, my eyes are here. It doesn't really matter what my eyes look like. And then the fact that when I smile, I have a gap in my teeth. And yeah, maybe it's not my best drawing because I'm doing this on the spot, but you know what? It's me. Who cares? So if you just find just a few of your own little features that you want to emphasize, just 3, then you can start out with making yourself into a really, really simple drawing. And then over time, the more you draw yourself, then the easier it gets. So I just wanted to offer that up as just a really simple way of getting more comfortable drawing yourself instead of having to do like some fancy portrait or some amazing little figure. And as you saw, that just took me literally just a couple of seconds to do. So I wanted to add that as a suggestion to folks. Yeah.
That's so fun. I was just thinking, I was like, oh, what would be my 3 most distinctive characteristics of myself that I would add to it, right? I was just thinking that right now, like, what would I choose? What would I choose? That's really fun of it. I like that a lot. I'm gonna have to practice myself now. Anything else that anyone wanted to add in? Oh yeah, Kate. There we go. Kate, I'll bring you in.
Oh, we have 2 Kates.
Oh, we have 2 Kates. Well, let's have a Kate party. Let's bring in both Kates. All right, here, hold on a second. I'm going to add both of you in here. So there comes Kate Ryder. And then we have, where's Kate Ryder? Where did she go?
Kate Ryder, you're right. So you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just on Avea's thing is I had done, when I went to Florida, I had done like a little tiny drawing of me, and it's really just like a little scribble drawing of me out stand-up paddleboarding. But yeah, I think making things very tiny or abstract can help too with, you know, if you're feeling a little intimidated with drawing. And then I wasn't on in the first part of the call. I logged in and then I had to walk away. So did we talk about writing yet as like words a little bit? Okay. Kate Rudder, were you going to talk more about drawing stuff? Because we can stay on that topic. Okay, I'll mute for a second. And
Sweet. Okay, I don't know how this works, but yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what Avea was saying, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of tension within using an abstracted or more simplified kind of comic-y language in an observational drawing practice. It's actually something that's come up in sketchnoting and nature journaling a lot. And I think there are 2 great tastes that work great together. So I'm just going to show like just a brief one. Like, this is an experience I really wanted to have. It's my first native plant, and I use very cartoony, very simplistic kind of block people here, but then I also enjoy doing more observational work on the side, so they kind of can work really well together. But one of the things that I love doing that I started playing with and is this idea of where you put the expressions in even just a emoticon face can be so much fun. I've got this concept of the Wonder Wheel, which has all the faces kind of just looking around in different directions. And even just like if you hear a sound, being able to put the face in a different area really kind of opens up that space. It doesn't always have to just be flesh on. So it's really fun. You can use any expression you want, but I think it's just kind of opens up this sense of space. And I think that's fun. That's all I got.
I love that. I love the wonder wheel. That's really fun. Just thinking about, because we always think like, oh, putting our eyes straight ahead, even on a stick figure, and just being able to think like, oh, I can just make the eyes go a little closer together to the right or the left, and bam, you know, that little human is looking like it's looking in a different way. I think it's really awesome. I've also wrote that down as well, so that's amazing. Thank you so much. Anybody else have anything else they want to try? Lindy. All right, here, hold on a second. I'm gonna figure this out. Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to Kate. Yes, I'll leave you on the spotlight, Kate. And then there we go. And okay, I think Lindy's good to go.
Yeah, thanks. I love all these ideas. And Yave, I especially appreciated like the biometrics idea because we use biometrics so much when we're out and about, but I've never actually made like a chart with my kids of their individual biometrics before. But my what I was going to talk about is a little bit more about like the scope and sequence of activities that I do with really young kids. And one of the very first entries that we do in our journal is always a drawing of ourselves, which, as you pointed out, Billy Joe, is like really hard, but usually kids are very used to like, they draw themselves in many different contexts. So it's something that they're comfortable with, but that's actually where we teach scientific labeling. So we start with a very simple, just here's myself, and I'm going to label my head and my arms and hands, or whatever they want to label. If they want to label their favorite shirt, or like, you know, whatever it is, they might label a color, like their hair is brown. So we do that kind of first and foremost. And then another thing that I've done, which might be like a little bit more specific to kind of the area that I work in, where we're doing a lot of, we teach reading through nature studies. And so we teach morphology, like, you know, prefixes and suffixes. And when we talk about, pretty early on, we talk about the suffix ist, which we talk about with like naturalist and linguist, and, you know, all these people who are experts in something. And we teach the kids that they're going to be, you know, an expert in, you know, in studying plants and in studying words. And so one of the activities I really like is asking the kids to imagine if they could be an expert in anything in the world, what would they be an expert in? And then they draw themselves with a scientific illustration as that expert. So they might say, like, I would be, you know, a balloon expert. I'd be a balloonist. Actually, that's a real word. Sometimes they're made up words. Or we do OLOGY, which is actually it's 3 different suffixes, but it's O, and then the LOG relates to logic, and then the Y. But like, what would you study? So like Lindyology, if you were studying me, you would need to study like all of these things that I love, like dogs and plants, and you'd be an expert in all of these things. So they actually make an illustration of themselves in their nature journals, you know, as it relates to their interests and things like that. So that's kind of fun.
That's amazing. Thanks, Lindy. That's super fun. I think they got a bunch of that into the chat for us as well. That's amazing. Thank you so much. You got lots of hearts on that one. Let's go to Kate. Kate. I think you're still. Oh, I have to ask you. Yes.
That's so amazing, Lindy. I love that idea. And now I want to try to do that in my own journal, is like do my own version, like, oh, what would be a Kateologist? And it's funny because there's so many of us Kates. Yeah, it's like such a great method of teaching, you know, and I really like the idea of like diagramming and labeling themselves as well. So what I was thinking when this topic got brought up, though, was mainly writing, because I have a journal practice. So every morning, you know, I wake up and or try to, and write in my journal just about like what's going on in my thoughts and in my head. And I know one of the things that we've talked about before in this group is like how hard it can be to put those sort of really personal thoughts into like a nature journal. And so one of the things I've been kind of experimenting with is putting them in like a very like artistic sort of way, so that it's not it just kind of like comes like as part of like, it's like, it kind of, if for me, when I look at the image, then it becomes part of like a kind of a decoration or something, or like a border of the page. But I can still like write down some like really personal thoughts and ideas that I'm having and experiencing like while I'm out in nature. And so this is some of them, obviously I don't really want to share on here, but this one I can. And so I had done a drawing of a tree. So this was part of an art class I was in. And so then but I had a lot of feelings that I was in this art class, and it just, I had, you know, a lot of sort of stuff came up. And so I realized when I had done the tree and just like the way I had laid it out, I had ended up with this empty space up here. Because I wasn't sure how tall I wanted to make it. And so I made the frame, and then I just was able to like add some text up at the top. And writing, for me, writing in script is really calming, because I have to slow down and like really think about each letter form. And then I think about each word that I'm writing more carefully. And I kind of have to write in pencil though, because it's very easy writing in cursive to skip letters and get all mixed up. But that's not really the point. And I think what's nice too about cursive is it feels almost like it's a secret code, especially with my kid who they don't learn cursive anymore. And so when I write in cursive, I'm not worried about the kids flipping through my journal and just being able to easily read things. So, you know, and I didn't put anything like super personal in this one, you know, but it was, I found it really helpful to kind of just put myself on the page and in that moment in that sort of way. I have so many, Lindsay says I have so many big feelings about cursive. Yeah, I don't know. I really, yeah, there's a lot of feelings and thoughts about cursive, but I just really enjoy it, how it can just become kind of this like creative border or background or kind of design thing in there. And then you can just kind of put your personal self into the page that way, if you're not comfortable with necessarily like I'd spent, you know, like a full hour on doing a drawing, and I didn't really want to like draw me in it, you know, and, you know, risk messing it up, or, you know, that stress or anxiety. And so just putting the thoughts and feelings, I can look at that and be like, oh, I remember. And then the other thing I don't know if you guys talked about this already, but it's like, it's so interesting from like a metacognition sort of standpoint that we're talking about this, because like you are the observer in every single journal entry. Like I'm going through all of my journal entries and I'm like, oh, but I'm in every single one of these, because every single drawing that I'm making, I'm making it from my point of view. Like I know that like the page itself is like this window into the world. And so that's my little window, and that's my own little viewpoint. So that was just like another thing I wanted to think about. I was like, wait, and then all of my wonders and all of my, you know, those sort of things, those are all coming from me. And so I do feel like, but I really love the idea of like that externalizing of yourself and of imagining what you look like within it, and trying to put yourself inside of that. Because we do ask, you know, like Lindy was talking about, like we ask kids all the time to draw themselves and to do self-portraits, and then we just stop. And so a lot of the reason from like an artistic development standpoint that we're really intimidated by drawing people is that our ability to draw people has stopped in about like 5th grade. That's about like 5th, 6th grade is about when we kind of stop asking most kids to do self-portraits. And then that's it. And so like but our rest of our drawing skills might have like advanced, and our thinking skills and all these sort of things. But, you know, we're not really asked to draw ourselves, you know, as like, hey, part of a job interview, you want to draw yourself and like how you see yourself fitting in on this team or whatever. Like we're not thinking that that's going to be there. So yeah, just some different thoughts.
Wondering now, like, why do we stop asking us to draw ourselves? Maybe, is it that we stop asking us to do art in general after a certain age? I wonder. And
I
then
just feel like developmentally a little bit, it felt like the younger kids, all they're really thinking about is themselves, and they want to draw themselves. And then as they get older, right, their world gets broader, and I don't know why they leave it, and that must be coming from something else as well. But I know there's also that switch of preoccupation with self to everything out there. So that'd be a thought about that. I love the borders idea, Kate. Borders of writing. Nice. I've scribbled that one down. It's like a great place to put it. If one had a centerpiece, which I never do. It's just all over. But if one had a centerpiece, if I get to that some point, I will have borders, or, you know, maybe I'll play with that idea in another way. You know, as long as we were talking about writing, I realized, I think I've shared that one of the ways I like to write nature journals is actually write nature limericks. And I realized they actually got stronger, I felt, when I started putting myself in them as an active voice, or actively affected or surprised, you know, because limericks always have that sort of surprise and humor piece. And at least to me, they were funnier once I got myself in there as well. So that's, hang on, I consider limericks a form of poetry, Avea. That's my form of poetry. I think the only other thing I wanted to add is I am, one of the things I've started adding to my journal as part of this piece is I realized I've started actually making a note if there's no details, simply because I can't, it's too close. I don't have my reading glasses on. Something exciting happened. I was outside and I don't know where the reading glasses are. So just that little physical limitation of, I can tell there's more going on and I actually can't see it, or I don't have my hand lens. So I'll make a note that this is a little, rough. And I've actually started making a note when things are too far and I don't happen to have my binocs. And so it's like, there's no detail on this because I couldn't actually see it, not because I was choosing to do a rough sketch. And of course, many times I am, but actually these goldfinches were too far. All I have is the silhouette. So again, including myself there, like why is my page the way it is? And it kind of puts me in there without me sketching myself in there. It immediately pulls up like, oh, they were that far away and I was actually seated here. And then when I do use my binocs, I've actually started sketching a drawing of the binocs in a corner as a clarification to me that no, I wasn't bothering the snowy plovers. I was doing it all through my binoculars. And that's why I have some of this level of detail. So that's what I wanted to add in.
Thank you. Appreciate is that I think that's awesome from a scientific perspective, is that when we talk about science, a lot of times it's important to note our methods behind how we got the answer, so that way if somebody else were to try it, then they could do that. But we also like to acknowledge factors in our science. And so if you're writing down, I couldn't see this because it was too far away, or because I didn't have my binocs or whichever, then that's scientific data right there about how you collected the information. And that's super valuable. And then having the binocs showing which direction you were looking from, also scientific, because then that way people know, stand here to see this. And so I love your strategies of including that, because I think that like, even though I know we mostly talk about including ourselves from an artistic, it's also ourselves from a scientific as well.
What a great point. Yeah, thank you for wrapping it up so neatly. And I've also realized, going back to it, just in terms of, I tend not to write down feelings that much, but having the binocs, drawing in there reminds me of how insane I felt going up and trying to, and I was just like, that is really hard. I don't know how Jack does it. And by the time I got down to my paper, I already forgotten where was the little triangle on the bird, was it how far below the eye was the stripe? So up and down a few more times. So sort of that feeling is just there by me putting in the binocs. So yeah, the scientific and the personal.
And
yeah.
Marley talks about how you can sometimes vent in your nature journals too, if something is being challenging. He'll vent a lot. He'll say like, this is hard. Why is this hard? But he writes in a secret code that I seriously, seriously envy. So, and I saw Eleni, you're raising your hand. Go for it.
Here we go. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I was in the car earlier and glad to be on camera and not moving. So I had some reflections about putting oneself on the page. And it occurred to me to reflect on the difference between nature journaling and art journaling, just to sort of overstate it. I've taught art journaling for many more years than I've taught nature journaling. And so expressing it in a kind of very extreme way, nature journaling is botanical illustration. We know it's not, but I'm just expressing it in that sort of very rigid way. And art journaling is all about feelings, like how I feel about everything. And I just love how we're talking about this overlap. And so I wanted to share some ways that I show up in my nature journal that I've sort of pulled over from art journaling. And one is writing, but it's a kind of writing that is not readable. So I think someone earlier talked about writing in cursive and how kids don't even learn how to write in cursive. So this really builds on that. And one of the things I do is I write in one direction, like maybe I make a little bubble or a little box and I write in one direction and then I turn the page and I write in the other direction. So it's literally not readable. And if I do that, and I wish I had some images to show you, but you can imagine, just writing in one direction, turn the page, right? And so it just looks like a little design. And it's really a way of letting go. Now, if you really want to hold on to those words because they're so brilliant or they're the essence of a poem, I mean, and you really do want to hold on to them. Before I turn the page, I take a little photograph of the words going in one direction. Another way to do that is the words in one direction are with a pencil, and then the words in the other direction are with a red pen, and then you yourself could read it if you wanted to. Even more interesting, I don't know if we've discussed it in this setting before, is this notion of acemic writing. Have folks heard of acemic writing? So acemic writing, it's spelled A-S-E-M-I-C, acemic. And like a lot of words, it's from the Greek. Yep, that's it, Ivea, that's exactly right. It means without meaning. So it's what a lot of kids do when they're like 3 or 4 years old. It's like, oh, they're going to write a Valentine to daddy. And they just go scribble, 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 scribble. Acemic writing can be really wonderful. And any number of fine artists actually use it as a thing in their art. But I find that incorporating both actual writing and acemic writing are very meaningful. And I guess the other thing about nature journaling, when I've shared with my fellow more traditional artists, art journalists, it's like, oh, well, what about all that emotion in your art journal? It's like in my nature journal, to some extent, I don't know if others, how this resonates or not with others, but I feel like I'm hiding in plain sight. The nature journal, it has it all. Like if you know me and you see this acemic writing, or you see these letters going one direction than the other, you kind of know, you might ask me like, oh, what's going on? And, but there are ways of being totally present, I think, where one has, it's not so much a private language, but, if you do plan to show your journal, then you don't want to have to hide things. So those are some reflections on this. And I just really appreciated, the conversation so far, and love the idea of translating the self-portrait into, those 3 things that Ivea talked about. So thank you. I just wanted to share those ideas.
Thank you, Eleni. And thank you for telling us more about, sorry, my voice. Thank you for telling us about the acemic writing. I never heard about that before. So when you say acemic writing, does that mean writing words that are kind of jumbled, or does that mean making something that's not words or letters?
That's right. You're making shapes, and you're making shapes that absolutely have no meaning in any language whatsoever.
Cool. That is really
Now, some people, when they're doing acemic writing, they can't help themselves. They start writing. But a good way to start, if you want to try this out, is just write the alphabet. Just write ABC, but write it in really goofy, sprawling kind of, or write it with your non-dominant hand. That's a great way to do acemic writing. The non-dominant hand, and
for some reason that's making me kind of remember this. It's making me think, okay, so last year Kate Rudder had a workshop about the senses, the 5 senses, and at one point we were trying to transcribe the sounds that we heard, and just the way that you could like interpret the sounds and however your hand moved. To me, that makes me think of acemic writing. That if you felt that a sound felt a certain way, then you try to transcribe it as maybe it like felt really circular, or maybe it just felt like, or maybe it just felt like, I don't know why, but that just makes me think of acemic writing. Is that sort of similar, do you think?
well, I think that's doodling. Doodling, with, by the way, is not pejorative in my universe. Doodling is very wonderful skill to have, and it's intuitive. So you can doodle to music, to sound. Now, I guess if I wanted to translate the bird call into words, and a midway stop would be acemically, then it would be that. But yeah, it's a fun way to think about it, to make those translations. The translating it into shapes, or the movement of one's own body as a kind of doodle, or a translation into words, whether those words are real words or not, or real letters or not. What a great question. I love the question more than anything I said about the answer.
Thank you. Kate, were you gonna?
Yeah, one of the things that was floating through the brain as we were talking about putting ourselves in our nature journal that kind of ties into this is another term for doodling. If you feel that is interpreted as pejorative, is symbolic and semantic mark making, which sounds fancier, it means the same thing, but it also means that those marks actually have some inherent meaning with them, that they're carrying some information for it. And in bird song that happens all the time. But I believe that there's this, I don't know, this kind of cloud of objectivity around science and that makes sense because it's supposed to be a evidence-based, shared, secondarily witnessed experience and proofs, etc. So I get that, and that makes sense. But in our nature journals, I think we sometimes rob our own experiences and that of others when we purely think about it as an otherness. I think othering nature has other consequences that is very damaging. And so when we're just the observer, we talk about the human gaze or the male gaze or those things, those are like an objectifying type of relationship. And I think our opportunity for ourselves in our nature journal is to really document the connections as well as the observations. So, and what's interesting is in that sensory embodied observation, which is smell and taste and hearing, they run the gamut from visual, which tends to be more way over indexed, but also shareable. Like if you draw something, someone might probably experience that. When you get into trying to interpret other things like taste and smell without having someone have that shared experience, it's so much more subjective. And I just kind of I can kind of see the tension rise in people when we start putting more subjective work into our journals. And I think it's an interesting phenomena. Yeah.
Kate, that's so helpful that you've given me a whole new language to talk about this, which is really awesome.
Well, Sunny Brown is going to be one of the keynoters at Wild Wonder, and she wrote a book, The Dual Manifesto. So she's
brilliant.
Awesome. Make sure you see her session. She's
fabulous. Say the name again, please.
Sunny Brown, SUNI Brown.
Yes. Yeah.
Very cool. And go ahead, Lindy. I saw you were raising your hand.
Oh yeah, this is such a cool conversation, guys. And I know this isn't particularly, well, it's not about the topic, but it is kind of moving towards what you guys are hitting at a little bit. In my research, I've found myself in the position of having to really specifically name and define different types of journaling. And so I thought it was really interesting, Eleni, when you were talking about like the art journal versus the nature journal, and how you brought kind of scientific enterprise into that, Kate, as well, and what are the purposes of these things. And I work in the context of the classroom. So what I was doing was really defining, or attempting to define science notebooks that students use in classrooms versus scientific journals. This is just the terminology that I landed on, but I feel like it's so up for interpretation, versus scientific journals that field scientists use versus nature journals. And what I interpreted that in my work currently, but like it's so up for interpretation, is that nature journals could be a kind of combination between the scientific field journal, but with more subjectivity. And so you have room for personal reflection and kind of that metacognitive practice that Kate was hitting on earlier, as well as the more objective scientific phenomena that students are recording. And so that's at least how I defined it in my research. But like, I just feel like it's so up for interpretation, and people define these things very differently. So I thought it was really interesting, the distinction you made, Eleni, between like the art journal and the nature journal. Yeah. What do you guys all think about this and like the different types of journaling? I'm so curious.
Purpose, about us thinking about the purpose behind these things. And that makes me think of what Kate was saying a moment ago about connection, about that's why we put ourselves in, and about not othering nature, because we want that connection. And I think that that's one of at least a lot of us, a lot of our goals where we use nature journaling as more of a tool, is that we're trying to get people to connect with nature.
Yeah.
And so making it personal winds up being important to do, because that's how we get people to connect with nature. That's how, by putting yourself in, that's how you build the memories. Like it reminds me of, is right there, that right there. You know, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. That's the most personal, I think, of those three, because you're asking somebody to connect it to memories that they've already formed. And like, I like to repeat this a lot because it was so wise. I've heard both Jack and Rebecca say some variation of this, that when you do it reminds me of, you're connecting old stories to new ones. So you're connecting the stories that are already in your head to something new that maybe you don't remember without likening it to something that you've already experienced. And so at least that's what I think of when I think of nature journaling. But I'd be curious to think about the other journaling that you had mentioned. And I saw that Eleni, you had a thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just found this, I'm finding this so stimulating, thinking about science notebooks, science journals, field journals, diaries. And it gets me thinking about how the kind of journals we create are so much growing out of traditional curricula in schools. So, you know, science is over here. And so you have a lab notebook, and then you have art over there. And maybe you have, you know, a sketchbook where you sketch ideas. And I think what I'm hearing us all say in different ways is the cross-cuttingness of all of this, that we, and it's in the spirit, I think, of Kate, not only we don't want to other nature, we don't want to other our own selves, right? You know, we don't want to other our own selves by, you know, for a minute, you know, last year I thought, okay, I'm going to have my nature journaling on that shelf and my art journaling on that. I mean, seriously, in my studio, and then after 3 weeks, it's like, well, which journal was that? Was that the art journal or the nature journal? So the only thing I've succeeded in doing in terms of different journals is I have dry and wet, because, you know, I need better, you know, I need heavier paper if I'm going to work with watercolors. So the materials may be defined, not the topic. so I think to just close out this comment, I'm finding now that what's really important is not only this wonderful conversation that's so generative, but when I'm, writing a flyer for my course or, pitching a course, is to really figure out which words, have the right resonance. Because if I call something a scientific notebook, even though it is, what our journaling, nature journaling really is very, it's anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So just figuring out which language works in which setting in terms of meeting expectations, getting them to show up, and then you can expand their minds and, that sort of thing.
This is really such a cool conversation. I'm glad it came up. Yeah, I think one thing that that Yavea was saying that really connects to all this is at least in the research area that I'm in, the inquiry learning space, research has shown time and time again that inquiry, and for students to follow the scientific method, it relies so much on building metacognitive awareness. And journaling really has the potential to do that. But if, like you're saying, if the lab notebook is so separate from the journal where you recall your thoughts and feelings, if those things are kept so far apart, you have a really limited ability to engage in metacognitive practice in just a standard lab notebook where you're just, recording the materials you used for a cookbook experiment. So I think combining them, or at least in my mind, the nature journal is kind of the combination of those two things, but it doesn't have to be about nature. I mean, I think a chemistry notebook could involve reflection and put yourself in that space, because it shows, at least in the classroom context, it's been shown time and time again that combining metacognition within the inquiry space is a great way for kids to actually learn the material, because like Yavea was saying, it's mapping it onto prior knowledge. It's mixing things that are personally relevant to students that they already have so much knowledge of, because it's their own awareness and thinking. And then also metacognitive planning and why didn't this work? And what could I do next? And what was challenging for me about this? And what came easily? And what was exciting? And what do I want to do more of? And that helps them remember the experience a lot more. So I just think kind of using nature journals as I've come to see them, at least from this group and from, other naturalists that I've worked with, using that as kind of a framework for how to build this into education in the science classroom has been a really helpful kind of roadmap for me in combining all of these things.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I don't know if you can really, bye Kate, thank you so much for coming today. I was thinking the same thing, and you sort of hit it right on the nose, is that I don't know how you can have them so separately, because if you're a scientist, there has to be some point in your scientific study that you are reflecting on what you did with this experiment or what you observed here that you did before, in order to make those connections, as Avea said, with it reminds me of. So to me, they have to be a combination, because that's how our brains work, is that continuous connection of what am I going to do next? What have I already done? What worked well? What didn't? And then how am I going to proceed forward? You almost have to have them there. Otherwise, you're carrying a lot of books where you have to have everything there, whereas if it's all just in one spot, I mean, it's right there, right? So I think that it's got to be a mix of both. And honestly, I think it makes it more dynamic when you have those combinations of what you're observing, what your thoughts and feelings are, where you are in perspective to everything. It makes it much more dynamic, not only for yourself who's doing it, but if you are sharing it, for other people to sort of read it and be in it. But I think also from a teacher perspective, to sort of gain all those different perspectives for your kiddos to sort of be nature journaling and what that means, and being able to have all those different tools, I think really kind of opens up the door a little bit more in being dynamic. And I sort of go with, there is no rules, right? Like nobody said that this is exactly how you have to nature journal. So for me and my nature journals, it really is day dependent. You know, maybe it is a sit spot today, maybe it's more about questions tomorrow, but for me, there's no rules. You get to do it however you want to do it. And if that means that you're taking art and the science and everything and you're mushing it all together, then you're doing it right. That's how I perceive it anyways with nature journaling. And that's my perspective, you know, with these groups and communities, is that it's really a mishmash. And I love it being a mishmash of all those kind of thoughts and things like that, which is pretty cool. Does anyone else want to add anything to this? We're coming up on the 4 o'clock, just after 4 actually. Does anyone else have anything else they wanted to sort of add to this? This is pretty a really cool topic of conversation today. And I really enjoyed how we sort of dive pretty deep into this whole like really kind of cool world of, you know, being very pragmatic and like we can draw ourselves into it. And then really sort of took it to a whole other level of really looking at the differences between them and what it means to sort of, you know, be in a nature journal, which I really enjoyed quite a bit. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to add to this conversation?
I'm just so glad it's recorded because I want to go listen to it. Oh, and Janice had her hands up. Yeah.
I just went, as I was listening, I just went in a direction, and I wanted to show where I went just in case it triggers something.
Yeah, love that. Love that.
So I don't even have anything to say about it. It's just, watch. I guess I went into my right brain.
I love that so much, Janice. Thanks so much. Well, I see that we've lost a bunch of people, so I'm thinking today is a great time for us to sign off at 4 o'clock. But I think that this was also a really nice sort of added talk to, you know, our chat with Kate about self-care and sort of, you know, don't forget about ourselves and you know, adding ourselves into those nature journaling, and that it's totally okay to do a mishmash. And I think that that's the really beautiful part about just sort of letting our words go, or letting our imagination go, or, you know, writing without purpose or without words or anything, right? I love that. My kids do it all the time as they pretend to write cursive if they don't know anything, right? Which I love, that sort of, you know, that sort of freedom of with that. Eleni, did you want to just add something?
Well, I know you want to wrap up, but I found
okay.
a photo. If I could share a screen, I'll show you an example of Acemic writing.
Yeah,
from yours truly. That's me. So here is an image.
Oh, look at that.
And you can see, right? You can see a mandala. And you have no idea that I've kind of, some of it is readable, some of it is not readable. So this is the example of, you know, writing in one direction and then turning it into another direction.
Yeah, that is so cool.
And
it really sparked something in some of us today.
And it starts with, I can read it myself, just do it. Those are the first words up here, just do it. So this is not Acemic. So I'm just showing you the going one direction, going the other direction. And so I'll stop share, but that's an example of using writing in such a way that can be very satisfying and emotional. And you don't need to do what it says when, you know, when you're done. It's like, you know, going on a good run. You know, you don't have to hold on to it and clutch onto it forever. You do the run and you're done. You do the writing and you're done. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Avia, did you have anything else that you wanted to add into today before we wrap up?
Nothing else, just that I always love our conversations. So
yeah, such a good one, right? This was amazing. Thanks everybody so much for coming and joining us and all of your amazing ideas. My page is full. So again, thank you all so much, and we hope to see you all again next week. Have an amazing rest of the day and enjoy everyone's weekends. Bye, everyone.